Good afternoon, and welcome to everyone joining us here today. My name is Shayla Favor, and I serve as the chair of City Council's Housing, Homelessness, and Building Committee, and I'd like to officially call this hearing to order. I'd like to thank my colleagues, invited guests, and speakers, as well as our residents for being here this evening. Tonight, I am hosting this hearing to share and hear feedback on the proposed fee schedule, taxi fare increase from the Department of Building and Zoning Services, and the proposed eviction bond in partnership with the Department of Development. Additionally, we will provide an update on the remainder of Council's housing initiatives. We will structure this hearing just a little differently than usual, where we will invite public speakers up for the departments after their segments and the speakers for the remaining housing initiatives after the correlating presentations. But before we get started, I'd like to take a moment just to acknowledge my council colleagues, Councilmember Nick Bankston, Councilmember Barosa de Padilla, Councilmember de Alcauer Pro Tem Dorans, Councilmember Melissa Green, and Councilmember Weish. And I do believe President Hardin will be joining us this evening as well. Do any of my colleagues like to make any remarks at this time? All right, we'll dive right in. With that, I'd like to jump to our first presentation. I'd like to introduce Deputy Director Tony Celebrezzi with the Department of Building and Zoning Services, who will present on the proposed fee schedule update and taxi fare increase. Director, floor is yours. Where would you like him up at the podium, or? You're fine right there, sir. Testing. Testing. Are they lit up now? This one is? Yours might be unmuted now. Okay. Well, we'll use this one then. Yeah. Thank you.
Good evening, members of council. My name is Tony Celebrezzi. I'm Deputy Director of Building and Zoning Services. I'm going to open with a couple of comments, and then our Assistant Director, Festus Manley Spain, will actually walk you through the fee increases. As you all know, Building and Zoning Services is self-funded through the fees that people that purchase different permits and zoning and go for zonings. That is how we fund ourselves. We don't use any of the general fund. Unfortunately, in this climate, with building industry being very volatile, also the actual square footage, unfortunately, of the many projects that we've been encountering is not as large as it was last year and previous years. And so the current fee system that we have, the current fees for each of the different types of permits, is not in a sustainable fashion right now. So we are going to need to increase fees on select areas throughout the fee schedule. We have many different fees from large from the airport all the way down to replacing a hot water tank. And so we try to target larger projects where we are still significantly less of a percent of the total cost of the project than many of our peer cities. And so with that, I'll have Festus step up and kind of walk through what we've done with our fee schedule. So, and then afterwards, if there's questions, I'll come back up.
Thank you, Tony. Good evening, Council. My name is Festus Manley Spain. I'm the Assistant Director at Building and Zoning Services. I'm here to walk you through the fee schedule update. I have 4 brief slides that talk about the fee schedule and what hope to accomplish. So as Tony stated, the Building and Zoning Services, our building section is totally self-funded. The fees we collect is from the fees we collect directly goes into our revenue. All the fees that we have on our fee schedule are codified and are referenced by the fee schedule in the Columbus City Code. Annually, as Tony alluded to, the fees for the building, our expenses for the Building and Zoning Services have continued to increase. So when we look at the fee schedule, a few things that we consider and how we adjust our fees. The first one is to reimburse us for our services. So basically, we just want to collect enough money just to keep the lights on. We look at the cost of construction. So typically, the International Building Code references that the building service fees need to be within 0.5% to 1% of the cost of construction. So we look to be within that range. We look at external benchmarking. We looked at other peer cities like Cleveland, Cincinnati, Nashville, Pittsburgh, and we also looked at other cities nearby like Dublin and New Albany. So what this does is gives us a better understanding of our competitiveness within other peer cities and within the area. It provides insight to where our fees stand in relation to regional and national industry standards. So it also helps us contextualize our fees, place our fees within a larger construction landscape. It also allows us to identify potential areas of adjustments and improvements. So what we hope to accomplish with this fee schedule is to increase our revenue by 20% or so, which keeps in line and also keep in line with our peer cities. So we didn't want to go too high. We just want to be kind of right in that middle of all our other peer cities. Another adjustment that we're making is that we are increasing our cap. Currently, our cap is $100,000, and our cap meaning the city of our building fees are capped at $100,000, no matter the project. For example, the airport, which is a multi-billion-dollar project, they paid $100,000 in permit fees. So we're changing that cap from $100,000 to $500,000. We're increasing our square footage multiplier, and basically that is a multiplier used to calculate square footage. So for every $5, for every $5 every 10 gross square feet, which it was previously, that fee is now going to be moved to $6 for every 10 gross square feet. And then we also have some additional fee increases, your standard fee increases for building permits. So essentially, we're looking to gain about 20% in revenue. We try to focus on bigger projects and not projects that would, not smaller projects to disincentivize people from coming to get permits. That's something that we're mindful of. So generally, with this fee schedule moving forward, we hope to be in a better place and adjusted our fees in a way that we will be able to get enough revenues to come in that will keep our lights running and keep the building department serving our citizens for the foreseeable future. That's all I have. Any questions?
Thank you. And either or can answer the question here. Are the changes that are being made to the fee schedule, are they for both residential and commercial?
Yes, but a vast majority of the residential fees were not going to be impacted because they typically are smaller customers that any type of increase is a larger percentage. As Festus said, we are targeting more of the larger projects, multi-unit residential apartment buildings, but also the larger commercial buildings, especially with the square footage fee. So again, we're still staying under that 1% of the total building cost, whereas if we were targeting and upping fees at a single family or a double, it'd be a much larger percentage. So we wanted to stay away from that, did not want to dissuade people from coming in and getting fees and doing things the right way.
I think it is very interesting, and I appreciate you all highlighting the timeliness of these proposed changes, just given the fact that the city had a cap of $100,000 for fees, but then also given some of the big projects that are on the horizon, it doesn't make a lot of sense for a project as big as an airport to be have the same type of fee schedule as something that would be commercial and a lot smaller.
We've always had a history of trying to keep our fees low and try to be as efficient as possible. In many other cities, our department feeds into the general fund. And so they don't want caps on their fees because obviously anything that goes into the general fund funds a whole lot of other activities beyond just the building reviews. Our chief building official, Amit Ghosh, from Cincinnati, when he was there, they built Paul Brown Stadium. And they paid almost $2 million in their building fees. Whereas in Columbus, at that time, actually would have paid $50,000, but we've raised that to up, and so we're going to raise it again to $500,000.
Can you speak to a lot of the feedback that we receive is around just the timeliness of permits being issued and things like this? Will this help to ease that process for the user?
This most likely will not impact the actual timelines. We do have an MOU with the building industry that sets out for whether it's two different tracks of residential or commercial, whether we have 30 days or 20 days to get a review done and then either approve it or send a corrections letter back to the applicant, and then their design professional needs to respond back to us. We've taken, over the last few years, we've taken many steps to try to continue to make that more efficient. We are all electronic. Almost all of our fees, especially the larger commercial permits, can be purchased online and are reviewed online. So that cuts out a whole lot of steps on the front end. We also do our inspections in electronic fashion, and that you can call by 4 o'clock or you can get online as late as midnight, and we'll be there the next business day, which is not something that a lot of other cities do. We do that roughly 99.6% of the time. Not that we track that or anything.
And I'll also add that raising the fees does help us become more efficient. Okay. And allow us to invest in technology and things like that make us more efficient and make things go quicker. So.
Well, Festus, you just introduced my next question very well. What will the 20% increase in revenue, how will that support you all?
Right now, 80% of our costs are staff, because obviously you got people that are doing the reviews, you got the inspectors, and then the other assorted support staff that faces them. This fee increase is going to help us ensure that we can continue to operate at this staffing levels. And that way we can continue to keep making sure that all the reviews are done in a timely fashion, preferably quicker. I know that our residential reviews, while they're supposed to be 3 weeks, they're less than that. They're usually at 12 to 14 days. Our larger commercial things tend to go the full 30 days because they're much more complicated, and they've got to get through many pages of drawings to make sure that they're all done correct. So.
I'll add quickly,
please.
Sorry. A big thing that the fee schedule also lets us do is invest a lot in technology. Like, as I said before, one of the things that we're doing is project management for instance. So we're looking to manage these projects from beginning to end, make sure that the pitfalls that a project usually sees, if they're not being looked at, having people, staff, and the technology in place. So to catch these projects before they fall in these pitfalls, and when they do fall in a pitfall, the project managers are there to help them. So one of the things that this fee schedule helps us do is to invest a lot in people and the technology to help these processes go faster.
Do my colleagues have any questions or concerns? Yes, Councilmember Bankston.
Thank you, Chair Favor.
Hold on, Councilmember Bankston. I don't think we can hear you.
Oh, that is my fault. Okay. I'm sorry. The light looked green to me up here. Anyway, so my question is around the fee schedule, particularly around affordability, and those that are developing affordable housing. I think about our nonprofit developers as well, and also our emerging developers. So thinking about those fourplexes or mid-sized developments, if you will. Can you just speak to that? Is that baked in anywhere, or was that given consideration in your thoughts of raising the rates?
So we've got a number of different things, some in place now, some that we're working on. Currently we've got an after-hours review project that could actually, on many projects, get you your permits within a week, as opposed to having to wait longer. You have to pay a premium for that. Now we also, our costs are to try to cover what we have to spend with staff time, and I know that we've had some discussions, I think, with you and with others about some different programs, and we're still willing to continue to have those discussions to figure out how we can reduce some of the cost for some of these smaller entrepreneurs that are building these. We also, as Festus said, we've invested in these project managers who, with residential projects, usually multifamily, they become an internal champion to make sure that those projects, when we send a corrections letter to their design professional, they reach out to their design professional and kind of bug them until they get a response back. Because we saw when we did the analysis a couple of years ago, we saw it go back to the architect or the engineer. We'd be asking some questions, and for whatever reason, they'd hang on to it for 2 or 3 weeks. And so that adds adds more to the overall process. So if our project manager is calling them up after 2 or 3 days and say, "Hey, did you get that correction letter? We just need 3 more pieces of information. Can you get those to us?" They tend to react quicker to us, which then gets it back to us. Then we can review it and approve it and move it forward. And we do that for multi-unit residential down to, I believe, 4 units at this point. The 1, 2, and 3s are usually on a pretty quick track right now anyhow, because they're pretty simple to look at and pretty simple to review.
Got you. Thank you.
And I'll add to that the way how we kind of have our fees arranged is to alleviate that increase on those smaller developers. So as we said before, we're looking at bigger projects, bigger commercial projects to increase the fees in. There's currently a sweet spot, which we're looking, okay, this is a sweet spot in square footage, where we can say, hey, if we increase the fees to hit this sweet spot, the revenue will be more targeted. I guess the increase is more targeted. So for those 4 units, 2-unit duplexes, 3 units, triplexes type of developments, we did not change the fees for any triplex 1, 2, 3 family developments. So we try to be mindful of that, as you're saying, of the emerging developers, and not have the fee change impact them as much.
Got you. And I appreciate that approach, because I think as we think about density, folks often think skyscrapers and 200 unit apartment buildings, but density is also triplexes and duplexes and fourplexes that we see a lot of our emerging developers, they build capacity. And so we want to make sure that they have that runway as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you for that question. Any other questions or comments at this time? All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Are we doing taxi fare increase? Director, taxi fare increase?
Sure. Would you like me to speak to that?
Yes, sir. And for all those watching, we had a Diwali celebration last week where we moved all of the council chairs, and so that's why the mics aren't working, because I don't think they got plugged back in. So apologize for the inconvenience. Please.
Thank you, Council Member. Earlier this year,
Good thing
I didn't touch it. I didn't touch it.
I gave you all that warning. So earlier this year, in
cost efficiency move. The Department of Public Safety transferred their licensing section and their weights and measuring section over to Building and Zoning Services. A lot of their activities mirrored a lot of the regulatory activities that we currently do. And one of the groups that we regulate are taxi cabs. The state has said we can't regulate Uber and Lyft and those ride share, but we do regulate taxi cabs. And they came to us here recently and said their fees, their meter amounts have not changed in 10 years. And so they asked us for a small increase in the meter fee. And essentially what it literally is a nickel increase for every 2/9 of a mile for driving, which basically comes out to be roughly 25 cents a mile increase when you're taking a taxi cab. And there's also a portion of it for waiting in traffic, because that's regulated also. So it's pretty low. It's what the industry asked us for. They haven't had a increase in 10 years, and so we thought it was worthwhile to bring to your consideration.
Do my colleagues have any questions or concerns, or just disbelief? You don't have any? Okay. I have a lot of thoughts. So 10 years since the city has amended the meter fee for our taxi cab drivers. And so what we're talking about is a 25 cents additional
Per mile.
per mile. Do we know what the fee is right now?
Every 2/9, the fee currently is 45 cents. And so it will take it up to 50 cents every 2/9, and I believe the math works out to be technically about 22 cents a mile, 25 cents a mile in new revenue for the taxi cab operators.
Director, are you saying night?
2/9.
Every 2/9.
2/9. Yes, ma'am. So I don't know why the code has it like that.
Okay.
As we look at things going forward with these groups, we are going to take a look at them and see if there's a better way to manage them. But at this point right now, with some of the other projects that we are undertaking,
Yeah.
it was just easier just to amend this and increase it than try to revamp it.
Okay. And then do we know if this amendment is in line with our other peer cities and how they are making sure our cab drivers are being paid equitably?
We have been. They are very much in line. We looked at New York, Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, and Nashville to see what they are, and we are right in the middle of the amounts that the other cities charge.
Okay.
So,
all right. Yes, Councilmember Bankston.
I'm just curious on this one. So I know the industry asked for this increase. So I'm guessing that they've already done an analysis of how does this make them either competitive or less competitive with other ride sharing opportunities like Lyft and Uber.
the amounts that the taxi cabs charge are actually less than Uber and Lyft. It just, you've got a little bit different variation or flexibility with Uber and Lyft. But this will help get them a better, be able to make a little bit better of a living by charging more fees. But they will not take them, it will not harm the taxi cabs in relation to the other ride share operations going on in the city.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We did have some outreach from some of our cab drivers that did come out to a council meeting to start advocating for this change. So thank you for prioritizing that. And if there are no further questions, we appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you.
All right. Next, I'd like to invite Deputy Director Hannah Jones with the Department of Development to share about the proposed eviction bond legislation.
Good evening, Chair Favor, members of council. Low-income tenants in our community often encounter many barriers to addressing legal issues in eviction cases. With your leadership and the leadership of City Council, the City of Columbus currently provides funding for the Tenant Advocacy Project through the Legal Aid Society of Southeast and Central Ohio to assist our residents as they navigate this complicated process. Currently, the city provides funding for legal representation. However, that representation may be cut short if a tenant cannot pay for a court-mandated bond when attempting to appeal a decision. This means that many tenants receiving legal services from our program are unable to pursue their case at the appellate level because they lack the funds to pay for the bond. Recognizing the important role that an appeal can have in ensuring housing stability for a vulnerable family, the Department of Development will allocate resources to Compass, who will disperse funding for eligible tenants facing eviction to pay for bonds when appealing their case. This will give tenants the ability to have their case heard and decided on its merits. With the release of the Stout study, which will be covered later in the hearing, we are reminded of the critical role that legal counsel plays in ensuring equity within our housing ecosystem. This grant will help us create one more way to keep a family housed, prevent homelessness, and ensure that those who may not have a voice are given the ability and the platform to advocate for themselves and their families. I'm happy to answer any questions you or the council may have.
Thank you, Deputy Director Hannah Jones, for that. Do we have any data on how many residents that had strong cases were unable due to the lack of funds, to post their bond?
I do not have that data on hand. I am very happy to follow up with you on that. What I do know is that it is not necessarily happen often, but it can be very impactful to a family when it can. We're working closely with legal aid on the implementation, so we would ensure that it's being used for families where there are very strong grounds for an appeal.
Okay. And what is the average cost of eviction bonds?
I believe in the range of about $1,500 to $2,000 has been typical. It is dictated by the court, and it usually represents a couple months' worth of rent, depending on the situation. So there isn't really an average per se.
And do we have an idea how many residents will be able to be assisted through this new piece of legislation?
Yeah, we anticipate setting aside $50,000. So it would probably be, if it was about 2,000, about 25 households. Again, that depends on what the court mandates the bond is necessary and how many qualifying households we have.
And what feedback or positions have been expressed by tenant advocacy groups and landlord associations about the proposed policy?
We have not talked to a landlord association group about it. Again, this will just be a grant that will sit with Compass. We are working with legal aid on the implementation of it. So we would have criteria and an application process in order to vet households that we're working with legal aid to ensure that it was a situation where it made sense for us to contribute this funding.
Wonderful. Do my colleagues have any questions or concerns? Yes, Councilmember Weish.
Another concern, but just a question. Obviously, you talked about 25 households being helped by this. We know evictions are likely to go up. Mm-hmm. Will there be a point in time we'll reevaluate, potentially add more funding? Is that something considered for the future?
Absolutely, yes. So the idea would be is if the tenant is successful and the appeal is granted and the bond is released, it would go back to Compass in order to hopefully self-fund it. It would be one where, yes, this would be an opportunity for us to engage in a different way with the community and see if it is value added. So we would reevaluate it at the end of the year.
Thank you, Councilmember Weish. You know, I think in partnership with all of the other pieces of legislation that the department and this council has implemented to support residents who are facing evictions, it really does demonstrate our commitment to addressing affordable housing and the lack thereof from all different fronts. And you'll probably hear me say this a million different times today, but our effort has to consist of more than just putting shovels in the ground, that we have to stabilize families as well. And what will be talked about later in tonight's hearing is the Stout study that reinforces the work that we have done to provide legal representation to those in our community who are facing evictions. And this, in partnership with this eviction bond legislation, further acknowledges that we don't have enough housing, and two, that the best way to stabilize families is to make sure they can properly stay in their homes. So,
absolutely,
yeah.
Councilmember.
All right. If there are no further questions, yes, Councilmember Dorrance.
I think that works now. Okay, without any scary noises happening. Deputy Director, just wanted to ask a clarifying point based on what Councilmember White should ask. So again, when you talk about serving 25 families, that's sort of the max at any given time, considering that those funds may return back given how that bond process would work. Is that fair? So we're talking about sort of a maximum of 25 at any given time based upon what is happening with those eviction cases. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. And again, as we look at what Legal Aid has been doing in their support with the tenant advocacy project, a lot of this will be learning. To Councilmember Favor's point and all of council's, it is an opportunity for us to find another way to impact families. It may be finite, but it also may be that one or two of those cases may help us and help Legal Aid change policy, change the direction of the court, and have a much more lasting impact in the long term.
Sure. And just to follow up from an eligibility standpoint, so you could talk a little bit about who would be eligible to be impacted by this program.
Yes, so we are still in the process of developing that criteria. We will ensure that we will have it ready for you once legislation is ready to be heard. It will be very much in alignment with what we saw in the Stout study and others, focusing on the families who Legal Aid is currently serving. So probably about the 200% federal poverty level is where Legal Aid is at now.
Right. Thank you, Deputy Director. Thank you, Chair.
We will now move into the update on the remaining housing initiatives. And as a reminder, in March of 2023, City Council announced a robust housing policy package to help create new units, preserve existing units, and strengthen housing rights. As of July 2024, we have passed 7 of the policies, which included retaliatory action, home ownership opportunities, providing targeted down payment assistance and housing counseling for first-time home buyers, third-party payment and pay-to-stay, which allows a tenant an affirmative defense to an eviction action filed on the basis of non-payment of rent, owner-occupied initiative, which provides home repair solutions for our seniors, legal representation at eviction court ensures folks have legal representation if they're facing eviction, and vacancy and foreclosure registries. If you have any specific questions on these initiatives, please visit www.housingforallcbus.com, and the contact information for each office is listed, or you can reach out to my legislative aide, Sandeep Jindal, at snjindal@columbus.org. Next, we will focus on the remaining initiatives from Council's housing package, and you will hear from each of the council members who have led on those initiatives. Followed by that, we will hear from our public speakers. We're going to kick things off with Councilmember Nick Bankston to share an update on the rental registry initiative. Councilmember Bankston.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to all my fellow colleagues here. As you all may recall that earlier this year, our office started to work towards the establishment of a rental registry. The purpose of the registry was to accomplish a couple of goals. One was to provide an avenue to give the city a clearer picture of the total rental capacity, something which cannot be gleaned from our existing sources and the data that we have. 2 was also to provide an avenue for us to examine trends in rental housing development across neighborhoods. Also to establish the establishment of a resource that allows tenants and regulators to contact rental housing ownership in the case of an environmental emergency, environmental nuisance, or any type of other issue that may arise with the property. And most importantly, I think for us, it was to also raise revenue, to establish a sustainable revenue stream to support ongoing tenant-based rental assistance programs and initiatives like some of that we heard tonight, legal advocacy initiatives, and potential additional funding for the development of affordable housing. All of this is really to get at the heart of what we wanted was who do we hold accountable? Understanding that if you're going to provide housing in our community, one, that you should be held accountable to the city, and also that we have revenues to help make sure that we stabilize that housing and stabilize those small business owners, which are our landlords. Despite our push to move this initiative forward, it was brought to our attention as we've been working with our city attorney's office, city attorneys at Klein's office, brought to light some legal complications, which greatly impacted the outcomes that we were hoping to achieve with the registry. Due to that change, my office has opted to shift our efforts in another policy that will allow us to achieve some of the same goals of the full rental registry. We are proposing now to enact a city ordinance requiring property owners to designate a local agent in charge as a requirement of operating rental property in Columbus. The agent must be a person who is physically located in Franklin County or an adjacent county approved by the city. They will be required to provide their contact information where they can be reached in the event of an emergency at the property, which is something that we don't currently have. As you know, the rental registry, many folks may know that the rental registry that exists at the county right now doesn't require really any type of contact information, and you are allowed to also hide behind P.O. boxes and those kinds of things. So this is really getting at the heart of making sure that we have a person, someone, or an entity that we can contact and call in the event that something is wrong at that property. A local owner can be assigned as their own agent, so the owner themselves can be the agent or someone else that they designate. And finally, the local agent in charge registry will be maintained by our Department of Development, which has been leading the charge on many of our housing initiatives. A designated local agent in charge for a property will accept responsibility with the owner, in partnership with the owner, whether that be potential criminal, civil, or administrative liability for the maintenance and management of the premises. I think this is really getting at the heart again that I think this council believes, and I know that I do, that housing is a right. It is not simply a commodity. And although we do know that our landlords are small business owners, they are providing an essential piece of life, which is housing and putting a roof over someone's head. So therefore, we have to have accountability. There has to be stronger accountability for if you're going to be providing housing in the city of Columbus. Over the next few months, our office will start engaging various stakeholders to discuss this proposal and receive feedback. As I've said from the beginning of this, I want to make sure that we have a robust engagement strategy, have something that folks can actually react to, and that and we're not there yet from a legislation standpoint. To date, there has been no legislation drafted, and a formal proposal has not been physically shared with anyone. Our office is also keeping a close eye currently on a class action litigation in Cleveland Heights regarding their ability to levy fees beyond property taxes to owners who own residential rental property in Cleveland Heights but do not reside in Cuyahoga County. The outcome of this legislation will inform our approach regarding this policy. We do not plan to legislate anything around this policy until the Q2 of 2025, contingent on the outcome of that litigation previously mentioned. And this is really for us. We want to make sure that we get this right, that this is a balance that we have to approach, again, between our small business owners as well as our tenants, but also the legalities of which we are working with in the state of Ohio, unfortunately. And so what we put forward, we want to make sure that one is strong enough that we can hold folks accountable, but that also is enforceable, that we will not have to retroactively go back and change. We do have our city attorney, Madam Chair, here with us. I just want our city attorney, Representative Attorney Laura Baker Morris, just to give us some clarify some questions, but also I think just to give us the ideology went behind some of the restrictions that you saw, Madam Attorney, on how we got here today. And then there's a couple other clarifying questions that I want to make sure to ask as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Bankston. Hopefully my mic is working. There it is. So some of the conversations that we had around rental registry weren't about the inability to have one at all, but the inability to have it for specific purposes. So there is currently state law that requires there to be a rental registry that's maintained by the auditor of each county. And there is an allowance for municipal governments to have a rental registry that would be somewhat laid over on top of the one that's required by state law. However, there's a specific provision within the revised code that states that whatever information is provided to the county is deemed to be sufficient for purposes of any rental registry that a municipal corporation might lay on top of that registration. So you're kind of left with a situation where if you have a county that is maybe not engaging as much as we might like in verifying the validity of the information that's been provided, we are still stuck with that information pursuant to state law. There's secondly a difficulty from an operational perspective of requiring individual landowners with registering multiple times and harmonizing those lists. But the bigger challenge with the particular rental registry as it had been proposed was with the idea that it would also be an ability to have to raise revenue. And so in the state of Ohio and in many other states as well, there is a general legal requirement that if you're going to initiate any kind of a fee for the provision of services, that fee must be relatively connected and have a nexus to the amount that you are charging in terms of what you are providing that individual for that fee. So as an example, if you're going to charge a fee because Building and Zoning Services is going to be engaging in a program of administering permits, then the fee that we charge for those permits must roughly be approximately supporting the work that's being provided by the Building and Zoning Services Department as part of that fee. That's distinct from the ability of local governments to institute a tax. A tax is something that a local government could institute and could assess on various usages. But if you were to do that, you'd have to go to the ballot. You'd have to have the support. It'd have to go to a vote. And there would have to be a determination by the citizenry that you approved of that particular increase in taxes in order to levy it that way. This is separate and distinct from situations where we penalize individuals. So if you have an affirmative obligation that a city council has enacted and says you must register, and then if you fail to register, you're going to be penalized for your failure to follow the law. That is not the same thing as having it based upon as a fee that's paid upfront by everybody who's involved in the program. If you're talking about penalization because of failure to comply, then it just has to be within the Eighth Amendment's not cruel and unusual punishment. So those were the conversations that we were having in terms of the existing provisions of the revised code, the difficulty of fee versus tax, and then also discussing the limitations we might have of being stuck with the answers that we were getting from the county.
Thank you for that, Madam Attorney. And then I think, particularly around the revenue piece, the conversations that we had was that the revenue, again, has to be tied to the registry, meaning that if we were to assess a fee, it would have to be tied to the operations of the registry, and it couldn't go to some other use outside of that.
That's correct. It has to generally approximate the costs that the city is incurring as a result of administering that particular program. And that can include personnel, it can include maintaining the registry itself, but it has to be generally proportionate to it. It can't be for purposes of raising revenue for other things. If we're looking at raising revenue for other things, now we're in the realm of it being a tax rather than a fee.
Even if that revenue, though, is associated with housing.
That's correct.
And one of the things that I pointed to, and I know a lot of advocates that I've had conversations with point to, is Cleveland's registry, and that they do assess a fee and they use that revenue, but there's a specific to a particular thing that initiative they have in Cleveland. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, Cleveland has a registry. They have a more broad-based registry. They have rental, they have vacancy, they have foreclosure, all kind of in one, and they've tied it to their lead program. So they have received funding from various sources to abate lead that exists in different buildings and in the water supply, and the difficulties that we have with older structures and the occurrence of lead, particularly in an older city like Cleveland, where that exists across the board in a lot of different locations. And so they have required and have used the fees to pay and offset the costs of going in and abating some of that lead. So it's not strictly just a rental registry. It's a rental registry where that registry is being maintained in order to identify where units are that have lead and where the lead has been abated, and then where the lead has not been abated, then they're using funding that they've obtained from a variety of sources to go in and abate the lead. So it's a little bit broader of a program and not specifically just a registry.
Absolutely. And I know a lot of it has been focused on revenue, again, for us, the thought process was how do we continue to ensure that folks are able to stay in their homes, especially when we know that we are coming on the end of historic funding that has been allotted to us to help with rental assistance. And so that's where I think a lot of the conversation was around revenue. The other things I think that we talked about with the registry was this is also about accountability. And so one of the things that we had looked at, and I know the advocates have talked to me about, is also this idea of inspections and regular inspections tied to the registry. And again, there is some precedents around this that came out of Cleveland in particular. But could you talk just to the limitations that the state code puts on us around municipalities regarding regular inspections that are tied to a registry?
It's not that it's tied to a registry per se. It's that you can't have a mandatory registration requirement under the state law that we then would allow us as a city to gain a right of access because they are complying with a state regulation requirement. So in Cleveland, again, they're going in because they have reason to believe that there's lead. And so the inspection is based upon a public health issue. Similarly here, if we have any reasons to believe that there is a particular rental unit that has code violations, including lead or including any other kind of violations, then we would be able to go in and inspect that unit for those potential violations. But absent that, we're going to have to discuss what process we would have and what legal rights we would have as a local governmental entity to enter someone else's property simply because it is a rental unit.
Thank you for that. And Madam Chair, I'll defer to you if we want to offer questions to our city attorney or myself. But the long and short of it is that our office, and I think under your agenda, are still committed to a rental registry. It may look a little different. It may have a different title and a different name, but we are still committed to that. But I think what we're more committed to is, again, getting to the spirit of why we went into this, and that is to get at accountability, making sure that we have someone that we can hold accountable, that there's a name, that there's a local person here that is responsible for that particular unit or those units. Because again, if you're going to provide housing in the city of Columbus, it has to be at a standard. It has to be at a standard, and it has to be someone held accountable and responsible that we can contact if there is ongoing issues at that particular location. I think that the conversation of if there is a fee or what penalties and all of that is what my office is looking to engage in conversation with both our residents, housing advocates, and our small business owners, our landlord community in the coming months. So I'll stop there if there's any questions from my colleagues and I'll turn it back to you,
Green.
Madam Chair.
No, please.
So I guess this is probably more a question for the city attorney's office, but I'm just kind of curious how this would compare to the Cincinnati program that has both fees for their rental registry program, as well as required inspections, as well as penalties, where if a landlord fails to comply with that residential rental inspection, they have committed a Class 1 civil offense and a Class D offense for each additional day that they fail to comply with the regulation.
Right, and I did look up the Cincinnati scheme, and there are some things within the Cincinnati scheme that we would be able to do. However, once again, their fees were not the things that were that high. It was the penalty provisions for failure to comply with various code enforcement requirements. It wasn't, the fees themselves were tied, matter of fact, there was a specific provision within the Cincinnati Code that indicated that the fees were going to be used in order to support the program. So it's the penalties again, where you're able to have a little bit more flexibility for failure to comply or failure to register. But actually the Cincinnati Code kind of makes my point, right? The fees are specifically limited. They're not that high, and they're related to operation of the program.
And then a follow-up question to that, if I might, Chair.
Please.
So you mentioned also the Cleveland model where where they're using the funds to help support lead abatement programs. Right. We know that much of what is driving the potential for a rental registry is the high instances of code enforcement issues and inhabitable living conditions that a lot of our folks are having to deal with. And so us using this as a tool to be able to better track and support landlords and tenants is kind of the goal here. So according to the Cleveland lead-based model, right, we could potentially use fees from a rental registry to then go in and assist with remediations for homes that might address code violations.
Potentially. It depends greatly on how it's structured. Once again, we have to make sure that the fees are roughly proportionate to the cost of administering the program. So if having a registry is one component of a larger program, and the registry is necessary in order for that program to be successful, and we can demonstrate why that registry is necessary for the program to be successful. And then we have costs that are associated with that program, and that program is itself intended to make sure that rental units meet a certain standard. That's something that could be done.
And would an eligible, so right now our EBA team, our environmental blight abatement team currently performs some of those functions for some of our vacant and abandoned properties or, properties that have been run down. So that could be, an expense that might be offset with something like that. Yeah,
potentially, yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any additional questions at this time? We do have a few speakers, so Councilmember Bankston, hold tight a little bit. I do want to say thank you. I think that the listening audience has to know that we put a vision out there in March of last year, a big vision to pass 13 pieces of housing policy in 18 months. But what this job would tell you is that, nothing in government moves quickly at all. And when we have hit several roadblocks with a lot of the remaining policies, and you all are hearing that, how we are reconciling that right now, but it speaks to our commitment to continue to meet the goal. And that is, in this instance, accountability. The other priority, obviously, for this particular conversation was a revenue replacement, just to be candid, as we know that we've put over $90 million of rental assistance out into this community over the last 3 to 4 years. And what does that look like for the city to have to continue in that same spirit moving forward, recognizing that this was one of the solutions that we put out there on the table. But having conferred with our city attorney's office and knowing that we had real roadblocks, Councilmember Bankston's team has been dedicated to finding a way around that. And so I just appreciate the effort to meet us somewhere, to speak to what I believe I have heard from housing advocates, which is we need accountability here. So with that being said, our first speaker is Ms. Cindy Flattery? My apologies for mispronouncing. And she will be followed by Anna Maria Perales-Lang. Thank you and welcome to council. You have 3 minutes.
Okay. Good evening, Council Member Favor, Councilman Bankston, and all the other members here tonight. As a representative of RED, which is made up of 44 congregations in our community, I am here to support the Housing for All agenda, and to let you know that through our annual listening process, we consistently hear from members of our community who struggle with the housing affordability and with poor conditions. And we commend you for having already accomplished so many things in the Housing for All agenda. Our research over the last year has shown that housing conditions are complex. They affect both owners and renters, and we're encouraged that the City Council is trying to foster more affordable housing. The work you've done on updating zoning and providing others incentives will make a difference, but it will take years for these results to be shown. In the meantime, as you well know, rents are going up significantly, the population is growing rapidly, low rent units are constantly being lost, either through gentrification or because the conditions are so bad that they become vacant and abandoned. Out-of-state owners own 1 in 5 properties in this community now. These owners often hide behind shell corporations and are hard to be held accountable. And renters, in particular, are vulnerable to predatory landlords because they have few or no options. We know you're familiar with all these facts. And while you have made progress on some of the fronts, as we've heard tonight, the work is not done. We encourage you to enact all of the remaining Housing for All proposals. And in particular, as was discussed tonight, we encourage you to continue to work to establish some form of rental registry that would require property owners to pay a fee and to provide the name and contact information of a local agent in charge who would be legally accountable. In addition, we would hope that you continue to find ways to ensure that rental units are complying with housing codes, whether that's having the landlord certify when they register that they're meeting code, or through some other means. We appreciate the discussion tonight and the light that you've shed on what a complicated issue this is. But don't give up, because the tenants that in our community need you to be their voice. A rental registry with a certificate of compliance would put the predatory landlords on notice that they will be held accountable in Columbus, and it will provide tenants and owner and the city with information to protect the tenants' rights. So we look forward to continuing to work with you. As you grapple with these difficult questions, we're pleased that you're looking at other cities, and thank you very much for the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much for your remarks. Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Ms. Cindy. I know that I've engaged with Brett on this and look forward to continue to engage with you on it. And thank you for those sentiments. And I think that you hit the nail on the head, that this is about predatory bad actors. We know that, like so many other industries, most of our landlords are good people. A lot of them are mom and pop landowners who are, in many cases, renting below market because they are benevolent and they care about the people that live in their units. But those that prey upon people, particularly black and brown folks, particularly our new American immigrant and migrant community, we want to make it very, very clear to them that we're going to make it more difficult for you to do business in this city. Because if you are providing housing, housing is a right. It is not simply a commodity to be traded. And yes, it does have a value attached to it. I'm a homeowner, and I want my value to keep going up. So when I sell my house, I'm going to be good. I can give it off to my son. But at the end of the day, housing is a right. And if you are going to provide that, it is going to be regulated as such. And if you're going to be a bad actor, we are going to hold you accountable in the city of Columbus. So thank you for all that you all have been doing around this issue and for your continued advocacy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Cindy. And Councilmember Bankston, you're absolutely correct. I have said probably 1,000,000 times since sitting in this chair that this has never been an indictment on all landlords in our community. And in fact, we cannot do our jobs if we do not have strong partnerships with our landlords. That's why we have been intentional in our engagement with all of our housing providers over the last few years. So thank you for that sentiment. With that, we have Ms. Anna Maria Perales-Lang. All right, let's let the record reflect that she's not present today. Next, we have Ms. Sarah, I always do it wrong. I'm not even, you say it so simply because it's your name. But welcome back. You're a friend of council. Welcome back.
Thank you for such a friendly welcome, Councilwoman Favor. As a representative of BRED, I just want to echo Cindy's gratitude for City Council for staying in this struggle and continuing to work with all of the logistics we heard about. Thank you. We are excited for the proposed legislation, including the notification requirements, ADU pilot program, the wholesale, like all of the things that we've heard. We're very excited also about that eviction bond. As the former social worker at eviction court and as a current BRED advocate, I can testify that y'all have hit the nail on the head. We are concerned even more with accountability than with raising funds for rental assistance. Those who want to exploit our residents are still doing so, and I think that we're headed in the right direction. One of the things that our meetings with code enforcement and public health has brought to light is that their hands are often tied in situations where they would like to enforce interior living conditions, especially because they need to be able to enforce things uniformly and with equity. And so picking a certain group, say, I know this is a problematic landlord, they have had court cases where they're not allowed to target or discriminate against specific problematic actors. We at BRED believe that the rental registry and some sort of certificate of habitability or certificate of compliance would assist code enforcement to fairly and equitably enforce the code, and would allow there to be a sense of proactiveness rather than only having complaint-based where we know that there's a power dynamic. Our research shows that the best way to strengthen the current proposal is to require a certificate of compliance with housing code as part of signing up for a rental registry. This would include an inspection before a property is able to be rented. It's a linchpin piece that strengthens all of your other proposed legislation. And yeah, so we think that, sorry, I'm hearing the new information. I don't want to take up more time. Thank you again so very much for what you're doing. BRED looks forward to working with you, and we're excited and encouraged by what we've heard tonight.
Wonderful, and thank you for your continued advocacy on this front. We appreciate you, and we'll share as much information as we can as it unfolds.
We're excited about it. Any
Thank
questions?
you.
Or
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Dimitri. And you know I'm not even going to try. Welcome back to council.
Good evening, members of council, Chair Favor. My name is Dimitri Hatzifotinos, and I'm an attorney. I represent the Columbus Apartment Association. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I am here as an advocate for the apartment industry. Our apartment association is generally comprised of larger multifamily operators that are maybe not the mom and pops so much as more big box multifamily. And so we have all kinds of different members, small and large. I'm here to advocate on behalf of all of them, but with a little bit of a twist towards most of the multifamily housing in Columbus. And I say that because I've heard a little bit about the registry, I've heard and read a little bit about some of the other initiatives, and I totally understand council's need or want to make sure that bad actors in our community are accountable for what they're doing wrong. I have personally, as an attorney for landlords, been involved in plenty of cases where there are bad actors. The city attorney's office does a nice job of prosecuting those bad actors. I guess I'm here to start by saying there are a lot of good actors here in Columbus. The majority of the landlords that I represent, that pay my bills, that help my kids go to school, do a very nice job. And one of the things about being a good landlord is that if you're a good landlord, you also have some income. A lot of your bad landlords, especially in some of the more public situations like Colonial Village and Latitude, don't have the money to pay their mortgage because they're not providing affordable housing, and they're ending up in court, and they're ending up being accountable in the court system, which is what the city attorney's office has been doing. The reason I bring that up is because there are a lot of laws already on the books at the state level that allow code enforcement and the city attorney's office to make sure that landlords are held accountable, like code here in Columbus, like Ohio Revised Code Chapter 5321, the Landlord-Tenant Act, that has a whole bunch of obligations. Legal Aid does a nice job of enforcing some of those things when people don't do the right thing. However, just in principle, a registry would potentially increase costs for all landlords, because any fee that you impose generically to everyone, the good actors and the bad actors, is going to increase costs for the people that pay the fee. In addition to that, if you look downtown as an example, you'll see a whole bunch of very, very new built, very, very big stuff. We'll take the Normandy as an example. It probably has a few hundred units in it. I'm not sure how many for sure, but I can tell you that it's brand new. It probably is in pretty darn good shape compared to something that was built in 1950. The reason I bring that up is because if you do a rental registry and you charge per unit on a rental registry, you're going to increase the cost to live for a tenant, the Normandy, and at all the other places downtown that are new, just as much as you're going to increase them for something that was built and not maintained like Colonial Village. And so we're here in Columbus to advocate for affordable housing, and we want housing costs to go down. In the meantime, we've had a tax base increase on the real estate tax side of 10 to 15 to way more percentage points in the last 2 years. And so the landlord community, because they're paying more for their taxes, they're paying more for construction costs, they're paying a whole lot more for insurance right now because of all the calamities that we're experiencing, is raising rents. Ultimately, we don't have legislation to look at yet, and so one of my roles is to look at the legislation and give you some feedback about what would work and what wouldn't, but it's hard for me to do that on the registry or any of the other initiatives here tonight because I don't have any legislation. But with respect to the registry specifically, if you're trying to raise revenue and you're going to take that from landlords as revenue, generally speaking, forgetting about the enforceability on the attorney's side, which is something I'd be in court on later, that revenue is going to raise rents. And when those rents go up, that is going to cause more evictions, that is going to cause more people to have to be dispossessed from their housing. In addition to that, if you require something like a certificate of compliance, the city is going to have to pay to get all of those units inspected and get that certificate issued. And that's going to cause a ridiculous amount of time delay in when somebody can get into their housing, which would then lower landlord revenue, make it more difficult to do business, more difficult to build, more difficult to borrow. So from the landlord perspective, again, I'm not here to tell you that it's right or wrong because I haven't seen any legislation, but there are a lot of real-time costs associated with that position. And because there's already a registry in Columbus, and because there are so many good actors, what we see again and again and again in the court system is the very, very worst of it being gone. Where are they? We can't find them. The banks can't find them. Code enforcement can't find them. But if you take a Bryce Road corridor property that is built in 1950, that is managed by a big company that has 7,000 units in Columbus, that has their whole corporate structure here, and there's a code violation at that property, which is 1,000 units, for example, the code officer is going to walk into the front door of that property, look at the property manager or the resident manager or the leasing agent and say, hey, here. Or they're, better yet, going to have an email relationship with that person, and they're going to email it, and then that's going to get fixed. And what you'll hear from the landlord community is that the landlord community wishes that code enforcement did a better job reaching out directly to the landlord community, the people that are here on site, the people that are doing a good job, because a lot of times, a lot of tenants will default to 311 and make a complaint without actually telling their landlord that they need something to be fixed.
Well, let me go ahead and stop you there because we're at time.
Okay.
Completely. But I appreciate the sentiment. I knew exactly the position that you were more than likely going to take this evening, which is perfectly fine because I think we need to continue to have open dialogue about what our thought process has been for the particular registry that's in that we're talking about this evening, but also some of the real challenges that we are facing in trying to implement something that is going to be responsive to what's happening on the ground. And with all due respect, Colonial Village is the absolute extreme of landlord neglect in our community. We have so many other examples of landlord neglect in our community that doesn't even rise to the level of a Colonial Village that is still impeding people's rights to have a safe and habitable place to live every single day. And I think we still need to acknowledge that. It doesn't need to get to a Colonial Village. And with all due respect, Colonial was in court for 20 years, I believe, right?
Council member, may I respond to that? I just have one thing.
Are you sure?
You have 1950s housing stock in Columbus that is owned by homeowners and that is also owned by landlords. Mm-hmm. The older the housing stock, the more it's going to need maintenance. The city is right to focus on things that need to be maintained, but they need to be maintained whether somebody owns what they live in or rents what they live in. And I agree with you that Colonial Village is the worst of the worst. My point tonight was to say that most of your landlords in Columbus, and I use the word most because that means more than not, are perfectly compliant, willing to do everything they need to do, and are ready, willing, and able to respond when it's time for them to respond. And council needs to look at that side too. That's why I'm here.
And Dimitri, that is why my first remarks before I called out Miss Anna Maria, once again, was to reiterate a statement that we say all the time. This has never been an indictment on every single landlord in our community. But we have to acknowledge what is happening in our community and that there are some landlords that have not held up that good neighbor agreement and provide safe and affordable housing, or have not provided an opportunity for complaints to be made and there not be retaliatory action. Because we know that many of these folks that we are talking about specifically in this instance are our low-income residents who have little to no room for opportunity to move. And so they are less inclined to even report to their landlord that there is a problem in their community. So we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can have this conversation about what's happening in our community, specifically as it relates to this conversation, while also acknowledging that we've got great landlord providers, housing providers, in our community that are doing everything and not more to support our residents. Thank you for your testimony.
I appreciate that, council member.
Absolutely.
I'll see you guys in a few minutes.
Well, sir, you probably ate into your time, but okay. I'm joking.
And
Two more.
And Madam Chair.
I'll pray about it. Next, we have Dr. Londale.
Madam Chair.
I apologize.
I just want to respond to one thing and just say that you haven't seen that legislation, or you don't have to come back up. I just want to reiterate, you haven't seen that legislation or proposal from my office because I made a clear, and I've communicated this to both housing advocates, to landlord associations, apartment association, to our realtors, that we are going to do this together and that we're going to work on that before anything comes to you in public that you see. So that engagement opportunity that we will be doing over the next couple of months, we'll do just that. It will look at everything. Because I, as also the small business chair, understand that our landlords aren't just simply housing providers, they're also small businesses. And so we have to make sure that we find a balance of how we move forward and do it together. So thank you for your advocacy.
Which is absolutely in line with every piece of legislation that we've rolled out. We've always engaged with our landlords, our housing providers, our housing advocates, knowing that we're never going to find the perfect piece of legislation, but we cannot not do something. And so this is us doing something for sure. Is Dr. Londale Towns in chambers tonight? All right, we'll let the record reflect. The next update that we have is rent increase notification. As the cost of living continues to increase across the board, it becomes of paramount importance for residents who rent to know when there will be an increase in the cost of their housing. This legislation requires that any rental agreement or renewal for a rental unit must require a notice when the monthly rental price will be increasing upon renewal. Currently in the Ohio Revised Code, under a month-to-month rental agreement, the landlord must give a full 30 days notice before increasing the rent. This is what we saw most recently at properties like a Riverview and Sandridge. In the case of a lease, more standard, perhaps for 12 months or perhaps an 18-month lease, landlords may not raise rents during the term of the lease agreement, but they could technically tell their residents 30 or 15 days before the date of the lease ending that they are raising prices. This notification is critical in allowing tenants who cannot afford the increased rent price more time to find a suitable replacement or access funds to stay in that unit. At our last housing hearing, this legislation was proposed to require that any rental agreement or renewal for a rental unit must require at least 180-day notice when the monthly rental price will be increasing upon renewal. At that time, we shared that we would take the next few months to hold intentional stakeholder engagement as we worked to draft legislation. And we did just that. Me and my team have had multiple conversations with community members and key stakeholders. From these conversations, we are now looking to propose landlords to provide 90 days notice when there is going to be an increase in rent over 3%. It is important to note that this notification does not apply to tenants who have their housing subsidized with a voucher, as there are other federal regulations that those units are subject to that would make notification unfeasible. Additionally, this legislation creates a right of first refusal for existing tenants. That means a landlord must offer the existing tenant an opportunity to renew their lease 90 to 60 days prior to the expiration of their existing rental agreement. There are 4 exceptions to the right of first refusal. Number 1, the tenant has expressed a desire to voluntarily vacate their unit 60 days prior to the expiration of their current rental agreement. Number 2, the existing agreement is expiring and the tenancy is moving to a month-to-month lease. Number 3, more than 90 days before the rental agreement expires, the tenant and the owner agree to a new rental agreement for the unit. And number 4, the tenant fails to comply with existing local and state laws regarding the tenant obligations. A violation of these provisions is a first-degree misdemeanor with a fine of up to $1,000. For landlords who operate under a business structure, organizational criminal liability applies. We hope to bring this legislation to a vote by the end of the year, but are there any questions or comments by my colleagues at this time? And City Attorney Laura Baker Morris, please feel free to hop in, as there was a lot of legalese there. All right. Miss Anna Maria, I'm going to call your name again in case you hopped in. And Dimitri.
Well, everyone, it's been a little while, so appreciate you having me back. Again, Dimitri Hatzifotinos from Willis Law Firm on behalf of the Columbus Apartment Association. Unfortunately, I received information in a blurb from Councilmember Favor's legislative aide at 4:28 p.m. today about this for the first time. So I'm not really in a great position to advocate one way or another, in the sense that the Apartment Association has not been a partner in this legislation. And it is difficult for the apartment industry, and I will reach out here and speak on behalf of the building industry and the real estate industry in this town, to be a member of this community and to help you, help us, and help everyone when we're not provided information until 4:28 p.m. for a 5 o'clock meeting. However, with that said, I will say this. Ultimately, any legislation that you pass that arbitrarily regulates what a landlord and a tenant can do is going to lead to litigation. You've already lost this case once at the county level in environmental court, because you're trying to shift the burden to a defendant to prove that they're not culpable in a criminal case, just like the retaliation statute that was passed. So this legislation, which I haven't seen, has its issues from an enforceability standpoint. It also has its issues because it makes it more difficult for landlords and tenants to play in the field that they play in. What if it's 89 days? What if it's 87 days? Do we count the 31st? What if they thought they were non-renewing, but then they changed their mind? All of those things will lead to more lawsuits, which will lead to more lawyers, which will lead to more cost for this industry. When industry costs increase, the cost of housing gets higher. That is a fact. We think, as an industry, again, I've had this for an hour, but I can say I am confident enough in the representation over the last 20 years that I've done, that I can tell you that we think this is going to arbitrarily increase the cost of housing in Columbus. It may help some tenants find out what their rent's going to be a little earlier. It might. But again, on behalf of the big box landlords that are in a business that have thousands and hundreds of thousands of units in Columbus, we're already doing that. Renewals are getting out 120 days in advance for a 90-day renewal, because economically the landlord wants to know if they have to turn the unit, because it costs a lot of money to turn a unit. We want to know if people are leaving. So who you're trying to help right now are people that are dealing with landlords that may not have the education to know that it's better to give those notices in advance. So it sounds like it's a good idea, but what the problem with that idea is that it's going to lead to no leases. The consequence to a landlord of having a lease and being regulated is that it's easier to be month to month because you can't mess with month to month tenancies at the city level because the state already regulates it. So what's going to happen is you're going to give people less security by passing this legislation because they're not going to want to do leases anymore. And so at the end of the day, it might get more expensive because, as Councilmember Favor said, they only need 30 days to raise the rent in a month-to-month tenancy. And so what I would encourage all of you to do is to come to the Apartment Association early and often. We are available. We want to be a partner. I don't want to come to council with a 4:28 p.m. email and have to advocate in an argumentative fashion against something that I don't even know about properly. I want to help you write it. I want to help be a part of it. I have been doing this for 20 years, and I have been a part of many of the legislative initiatives at the city level until now. And I don't know why. I'm unclear about that. But I can tell you that the apartment industry is here to be a partner with all of you. We're here to help. We're here to try to make this industry better for our landlords and, most importantly, our customers, our tenants. We want tenants to have safe, affordable places to live. And sometimes regulation is helpful for that. It really is. I'm not saying that it's not. But sometimes, if it's not calculated to lead to some result that is going to help everybody, and if it's going to make things more expensive, maybe we should go back to the drawing board and think about what the impact is going to be. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
No, I do have a remark, though. We have reached out to the Apartment Association, and others that you represent have had these conversations pretty early on, so that might be why you're unable to recall us having this conversation about the rent increase notification and how much time could get there. That's how we were able to reach a middle-of-the-road timeframe, but we're happy to circle back around and have additional conversation moving forward with you all.
I got this current iteration at 4:28 today. Thank you.
Chairman, can I ask a question? Oh, somebody's a question? Yes, I do have a question. So you mentioned the industry.
I already know.
No.
Wait, Shannon texted you.
Please go ahead. Oh, so you mentioned the industry best practice standard of notification of 120 days. You also mentioned that more than the majority, as in more than 51% of people who own rental properties, live locally here in Columbus, and they're mostly all good actors. If the industry best practice is 120 days, which I think is what this legislation originally began at, 180-day notice. We reduced that down to 90, and your members are already doing that. Then what is the harm? Where is the damage in us trying to help provide additional supports for that 49% of people? Because I'll tell you, as a social worker who has sat across the table from many people just distraught, I'll tell you, as a small business owner whose partner just had to move out of our shop after being there for 10 years because of a 50% increase in our rent. I know other people's family members have been impacted that are sitting on this dais right now to unbelievable rent increases. If it has not affected your family personally, consider yourself a lucky one, because I think very soon it will have touched all of our lives. And so what is the harm in us providing additional parameters to help incentivize that 49% if your membership is already operating at 120-day notice?
Councilmember Green, I am so very glad you asked that question. You and I interpret what you're trying to do very, very differently. And again, I haven't seen legislation. I'm just a lawyer, okay? I am here as a lawyer and as an advocate, but as a lawyer, you're not just requiring notice. That's not what your intention is. Your intention is to criminally make someone culpable for not giving notice unless they skip 3 steps. So when you get on the road and you try to drive a car and you know that the speed limit is 65, you know that if you go 67, you are subject to criminal culpability. We all do, and we all still get on the road and have to follow the law. Well, now you're making criminally culpable my client's business. And I don't know what the ramifications of that is because I've never litigated it yet. But when I litigate it, when my client, a property manager who's sitting in her house, who may be a tenant herself, who's got a husband who may have had a rent increase of 50%, has her name on a summons to go to the Franklin County Environmental Court and potentially face a $1,000 a day fine or whatever it is, $100, plus X amount, 6 months in jail, that does not seem to me, as just a normal person, like the kind of thing that I want public policy to favor, because I don't want that property manager to fear going to jail because maybe her notice was 89 days, especially where industry standard is already 120. So what's the harm that we're trying to prevent? If we already have an industry standard of 120 days, right, then maybe what we need to do is educate that other 49%, and I think it's probably less than that, but the other 49% needs to know, hey, get your notices out faster. So let's take some money and let's push that education piece. Let's take some money and increase rental assistance, which directly benefits tenants, which we're all in favor of equally, and let's not criminally vilify not the owner that lives in San Diego that Councilmember Bankston wants to make sure is accountable, but the property manager that lives downtown who's also one of us, because that's who's going to end up in environmental court with the criminal summons. And that's a very scary thing to a lawyer, because I understand what it feels like to represent somebody that is now going to potentially face jail time because she gave an 89-day notice. That doesn't seem like good public policy.
Well, I think the harm that we're trying to address is exactly what this council has been reconciling for 2 years. I acknowledge Sandridge and Riverview in my remarks, and those are just 2 apartments that have had to adjust to extreme rent increase notifications. But we've also had to reconcile with folks from our community who have come to council in tears because they are facing displacement. So not only is it the potential for one of your clients to quote, end up in environmental court, but we've got people that are literally in eviction court that are in our homeless shelters that we are trying to address. So once again, I am more than happy for us to have additional conversation about the additional items that you heard tonight about this policy, but that is the impetus for why we are moving forward in this direction, because we didn't see just a double increase. We saw triple and sometimes quadruple the rent increase in our community. I don't know very many people that can navigate that.
I agree with you. Unfortunately, the industry saw double-digit increases in taxes, insurance, construction costs. We all know how bad inflation has been since 2020, since COVID. And these are the kinds of conversations that the industry, from my perspective, would much rather have at a coffee table altogether, not in a public hearing. So I would love to sit down and have this conversation and try and figure out what the legislation is that might make sense, perhaps without criminal penalties. Perhaps there's some middle ground there. I've been given what I've been given, and so here we are.
Thank you for your comments today.
Thank you.
All right, next we're going to hear from Council President Shannon Hardin, who will provide an update on the wholesaler regulation policy.
Thank you, Chair Favor, and want to take the opportunity, again, apologize for my tardiness to this conversation, but this is a conversation that we would not be having this way without the leadership of Councilmember Favor. When I hear some of these arguments about what may happen in our community, and really what folks are asking us to do is don't do anything different. It brings back that adage of continue to do the same thing, expecting a different result. What we do know, and I was glad that Councilmember Green brought up the fact that folks are being touched by evictions more now in Central Ohio than ever before, is that our market is changing. And the pressures that our residents are feeling are increasing. And the protections that we have for them are not there yet currently in our community. And it would seem absurd and like this council is putting our head in the sand to continue to watch that and not to act on this. And so, yes, we will have engagement. That has been a benchmark, hallmark of our council around policies like this. But we also will have action because we don't see this correcting itself. And so we continue to invite folks to be a part of these conversations. But this idea that we'll just let it be and it will just happen, to me, is starting to seem absurd. And so, again, thank you, Councilmember Favor, for allowing me to move up in the conversation. I'm here to talk about a piece of legislation that my office has been working on for some time now. And it is taking a look at the growing share of properties in our community that are being purchased by institutional investors, bulk buyers, and high-volume landlords. Certainly, a lot of institutional investing is perfectly legitimate, but what we've heard a lot from our residents about is the issue of predatory wholesalers. These are wholesalers who send those annoying, harassing text messages, "Can I buy your house for cash?" They text you, they call you, they send flyers to our residents. We call them predatory because it's predatory wholesaling, and it is complicated, but it's basically where buyers go into distressed neighborhoods, often going after those who are struggling to pay their taxes or pay bills, especially now after the property taxes went up. So, Dimitri, we do acknowledge that and the pressure that that puts on folks, but it's shared pressure already. They misrepresent themselves as realtors or brokers, often actively marketing properties, even scheduling walkthroughs and advertising the property to investors online, often preying on communities of colors or seniors. And they make a low-ball cash offer to get a seller's house under contract. Once a wholesaler gets a seller's home under contract, they find an interested investor to buy it. The wholesaler then assigns their rights in the contract to the buyer at a higher price than the price contracted with the seller, and then keeps the difference. They are essentially the middleman to match investors, buyers with sellers, but without following any of the protections or regulations that our realtors follow during regular real estate transactions. So wholesalers have no fiduciary duty to represent the best interest of the consumer, homeowners, and have no oversight by the Division of Real Estate and Professional Licensing. In addition to often misleading homeowners of their true intentions, wholesalers sometimes enter contracts without the intent or ability to close. And if they are unable to find an end buyer, the deal falls through completely. And they also avoid paying the transfer fee in this process. So most of these estates haven't gone after wholesalers for several reasons. The way they operate lets them fly by night, so you can't measure exactly how much of this activity occurs. We know that wholesalers often take advantage of loopholes in laws and use a range of LLCs to obscure and hide their tracks. But what we also know is that wholesaling is a critical link in the chain that moves a lot of properties into the hands of out-of-state owners. And we also know these often become the properties that deteriorate neighborhoods and become hotbeds for code enforcement and safety issues. However, over the last few months, we have been looking at what cities like Philadelphia and states like Arizona have done to bring more consumer protection to the process. We finally now have a draft of legislation that we can share. This legislation would do several things. First, we would require anyone that is wholesaling in the city of Columbus to register with the Department of Building and Zoning Services. Second, that wholesalers would have to agree to certain business practices focused on protecting consumers. For example, they must initiate any contact in writing, identifying themselves as a wholesaler. They'd also have to use certain standard disclosures that must be shared with any individual that a registered property wholesaler engages. That way, residents can understand things like how to identify fair market value and residents can understand the person purporting to represent them may not actually have fiduciary duty to them. Those who fail to register or who fail to abide by these practices would be subject to penalties. Finally, we know these new rules only matter if people know about them. So we would also launch an educational campaign to tell our residents about wholesaling and help them understand what their options are when selling a home. We want folks to know wholesaling is, why it is not their only option, and how they can negotiate a good deal, and how they should report bad behavior when they experience it. We also want to educate on what are the red flags in real estate transactions that should give them pause. So that's where we are. We'd like to pass these new rules by the end of the year, and it would take several months for them to go into effect, since the Department of Building and Zoning would have to create the online reporting portal, issues, and other rules and forms. We have two speakers, but I'm going to turn it back over to council member. I would say that, just like I believe all the pieces of legislation that we've been talking about, to say there has not been engagement along the way is just not true.
It is.
So if that is what folks will say, then that is not true. There has been, and there will continue to be up until said passage or consideration. And we will take, and my office would love to hear from more folks about this up until as we lay out that process. But thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely, and very much like Councilmember Bankston, this specific piece of legislation around wholesaler regulation, we hit many roadblocks here, and Council President Hardin's office has been intentional about finding solutions to still address the growing concern that we are hearing from residents almost daily about the predatory behavior that they are personally experiencing, also being unequipped to handle it, and demanding that something happen, and recognizing the limitations of our power as a local municipality, and understanding that this is really the playground for the state to engage in. But what is our role and what can we do? And this is what you have heard Council President present tonight. So, Council President, we'll turn it back over for your speakers.
So we have Scott from the Columbus Realtors. Oh, Scott is here. Scott, welcome, sir.
Council President Hardin, Chair Favor, members of the Columbus City Council Housing Committee. President Hardin, I was going to ask you to pronounce my last name since I knew you were going to have an issue with it, but that's okay. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on behalf of Columbus Realtors in support of this committee's review of the wholesale regulations, an opportunity to protect consumers and to rein in on predatory, unlicensed practice of real estate. My name is Scott Rabchak, and I serve as the 2024 president of Columbus Realtors, a professional trade organization which is comprised of over 10,000 real estate professionals engaged in commercial and residential real estate. I'm going to reiterate some of the things that you just talked about. Wholesaling is the practice where a wholesaler enters into a contract with a property owner and then assigns their interest in that contract to a third-party investor for an assignment fee. While this may not sound threatening, problems arise when wholesalers engage in aggressive tactics to persuade homeowners into entering that contract. Unlike an investor who purchases, renovates, and then relists a home after purchasing it, wholesalers have no intention of actually purchasing the property and never take title. They never take title. If the wholesaler cannot find an investor to sell that contract to, the wholesaler will back out of the contract without closing, with few or no consequences. Again, with few or no consequences. Unlike licensed real estate professionals who receive training and are beholden to Ohio laws as well as fiduciary obligation to protect and promote the client's best interests, wholesalers operate in the shadows, and state regulators struggle to take action in cases of abuse. We believe the legislation being proposed aims to protect consumers, particularly those who are often targeted the most, our aging populations, and also those in historically disadvantaged areas. By establishing a registry in which wholesalers would be required to enter into, the city will be able to add layers of accountability to bad actors. The legislation also increases the transparency surrounding the wholesaling process by requiring wholesalers to disclose to the homeowner and the end buyer their true intentions. This disclosure form is vitally important, and it informs the homeowner that the wholesaler is not representing them, that the wholesaler intends to assign their rights to the contract for profit, and that they may be offering below fair market value for that property. We believe that the disclosure to homeowners should be required before entering into any binding contract. We recommend amended language to that draft that would state such, which would also allow for added consumer protection. We owe it to the citizens of Columbus to enhance transparency should they go into contract to sell their home, and have increased education when dealing with these callers or these solicitors. And we would welcome the opportunity to partner with the city in any way we can and help you in any way we can. While we support the city's efforts to protect consumers, we do have some concerns with other proposals on the agenda today and their unintended consequences in harming Columbus residents and the real estate market. But in closing, we're faced with a unique opportunity to create guardrails for our citizens. Passing wholesaling legislation would ensure that homeowners are making informed decisions when they are entering into contracts to sell their properties. We would also always stand by and be ready as a trusted and reliable source of information at this committee and or council, or as this committee and or council explores other housing legislation. There's precedent for cities taking major steps at protecting consumers, just like this. We strongly support the proposed wholesaling legislation and urge council's passage. Lastly, we look forward to our continued partnership and working with all of you in any way we can on important housing policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. And I think Scott does several round of applause. We just appreciate, I think that I can speak for the council. The apartment, or the realtors have been a good partner with us, giving us real feedback, like the amendment to make some changes as we have gone through it. We appreciate it, and we will be leaning in furthermore before passage.
And Council President, I also want to say, because I think that there might be the impression that we never listen to any folks, or like we have all the answers, and we don't. Like we don't have all the answers. We're just willing to try. And this was an idea that you all brought to us over 2 years ago. And it was before it even started to become as prevalent as it is today. And so I think that does need to be said out loud, because sometimes it appears to be that we're adversarial with one another. And I think it's healthy to have dialogue out in the public, but also to recognize that you've got 9 folks here that are committed to addressing the solution. It doesn't matter who the idea comes from, but just as long as we can put the research behind it and figure out if it can work. And you all brought that idea to us, and we did what we needed to do to figure out how we could make it work in Columbus. And so I'm going to continue to make that invitation to our listening audience, that if you've got ideas, please bring them to us so that we can do the work that we need to do on our end to implement them for all residents in Columbus. So thank you for that as well.
In many cases, these things are awareness campaigns, right? If we're not all aware and we're not focused, how can we react, right? How can we make decisions or informed decisions that help, obviously, the consumer or the public? So, again, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I think Ms. Anna Marie was also scheduled to speak on this legislation, and she's not here, but please let the record reflect. And then I have Lucy Wolf, who is scheduled to speak on this legislation, and Ms. Lucy is not here either.
All right.
Madam Chair, thank you for your consideration.
Absolutely. Thank you, Council President. Moving right along. Next, I'd like to share more information about a Stout study report that you all have heard about this evening. that was completed and shared publicly last month. The study was commissioned by City Council to study the effectiveness of one of Council's housing initiatives that was passed last year, and that's legal representation at eviction court. When I joined Council in 2019, we announced funding for Legal Aid Society of Columbus, provided access to an attorney through the Tenant Advocacy Project program. At that time, Franklin County was averaging around 18,000 evictions a year. Since the pandemic, we have seen more and more residents struggle to make ends meet, and this has been extremely prevalent in the ability of residents to remain housed. In 2023, Franklin County evictions filings exceeded 24,000, a 20-year high and the highest in the state of Ohio. Under our flagship program, Housing for All, last year we passed $1.5 million in funding to pilot an expansion of the tenant advocacy program, providing legal representation at eviction court for eligible tenants. Recognizing that nationally about 90% of landlords are represented by legal counsel, but fewer than 5% of tenants have representation. Stout evaluated the costs and potential economic benefits associated with our pilot to an eviction access to counsel for income-eligible tenants in eviction proceedings in Columbus and Franklin County. They found that at full implementation, Columbus and Franklin County, with a $6.1 million investment, may recognize economic benefits of at least an estimated $24.4 million. This means for every $1 spent in providing free representation to eligible tenants, the city and county tax could save $4 in costs related to homelessness, health care, and other social services supporting agencies. The study also found that approximately 4,900 households would be represented annually, or 25% of all households facing eviction would be able to get the legal help every year. Having a lawyer in eviction court helps tenants in important ways. It can stop unfair evictions, lead to better payment plans, and give tenants more time to find a new home if they have to move in it or likely need to improve the implementation of complementary programs in Columbus and Franklin County, such as mediation, emergency rental assistance, and court navigators. Eviction remains a leading cause of homelessness. The Community Shelter Board's point-in-time count showed a 44% increase in homelessness from 2022 to 2023. By investing in an eviction access to counsel program, we can disrupt and prevent the cycle of homelessness, as well as see a reduction in costs associated with housing social safety net responses, such as emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, and hotel stays, which are shared largely in part by Columbus and Franklin County. This can also help our homeless shelters, which are currently overwhelmed with waiting lines of over 100 people. The study also demonstrated that an eviction access to counsel program can have an impact on crime rates. Research has demonstrated how higher rates of eviction correspond to higher rates of homicide, robbery, and burglary, as well as higher rates of crimes associated with procuring shelter, such as forcible entry and vehicle theft, and quality of life crimes. Additionally, an individual detained for a misdemeanor in Franklin County spends 22 days incarcerated at an estimated cost of $100 a day. By investing in an eviction right to counsel program, we could see a reduction in the public criminal justice costs in Columbus and in Franklin County. So if you're interested in reading the full report, you can go to www.housingforallcbus.com/stout, that's STOUT, study, that's it. I was going to say .com. It's not .com. We also have Joshua Shunami with Columbus Legal Aid, and I believe I butchered your name. Tonight is not my night for names. I apologize. And you're going to share some firsthand insights on the program's impact and to address any questions regarding the study. Thank you for being here.
President Hardin, Pro Tem Dorans, and Madam Chair Favor, thank you for inviting Legal Aid of Southeast and Central Ohio to testify about the crucial benefits of providing Columbus tenants with representation at eviction court. I am Joe Shitsushima, and I manage the Tenant Advocacy Project, a clinic that provides free legal assistance to low-income tenants facing eviction here in Franklin County. With the tremendous and ongoing support of the City of Columbus, my colleagues and I have represented thousands of tenants in eviction court. Columbus's investment in our work has kept families housed, has upheld fundamental tenant rights like pay to stay, and has given tenants a voice and fair treatment in our judicial system. This investment reaps benefits beyond reducing evictions. Last August, as earlier mentioned, the financial advisory firm Stout, Rusius, and Ross released a report that found that Columbus saves $4 in collateral costs for every dollar invested in representation for tenants. Columbus's current investment of $1.5 million this year is estimated to save the community $6 million in costs stemming from evictions, such as the cost for emergency housing and shelter, the increased strains on healthcare, losses in childhood education, and work productivity. Investing in tenant representation is effective because it ensures that tenants' rights are protected during eviction proceedings. Take our client Janine as an example. Janine lives in subsidized housing with her husband and kids. She was late on paying her rent because of a recent job change, and instead of accepting her late rent, her landlord refused it and filed an eviction. Janine got assistance from our attorney, Maddie Hill, who helped Janine enforce her rights under Columbus's pay-to-stay protection, which requires landlords to accept late rent when offered in full. After a lengthy trial over the legalities of Columbus's pay-to-stay ordinance, the landlord finally conceded, accepted Janine's rent, and allowed her family to stay in their home. Providing representation to tenants like Janine is a cornerstone to providing access to safe and affordable housing in Columbus, because frankly, it is not easy to be a tenant. Tenants do not own their kitchens where they cook, the walls where they hang their photos, or the rooms where their children sleep. While a homeowner molds their home around their life, a tenant must scrupulously mold their life around their lease provisions. While this doesn't mean tenants are without rights, rights do not exist in a vacuum. Rights require advocacy and community support, which is exactly what the City of Columbus has invested in by expanding tenants' access to counsel. On the behalf of my colleagues from Legal Aid and the clients we serve, we thank you for your support and our work and our advocacy for Columbus tenants through programs like Access to Counsel and Housing and the Housing for All initiatives. Thank you for your time, and I'm ready for any questions.
Thank you. Do any of my colleagues have any questions or comments? What I will say, and this might be a question for you or Deputy Director, Ms. Jones here, we know that Franklin County continues to top the state with the number of evictions that are filed every single year, last year being around 24,000. But we know that what we have been doing for the last 3 or 4 years is working because we don't have 24,000 set outs. So can either of you speak to why this program is going to be that much more important for us to implement moving forward?
Yeah, it's a kind of it's a curious finding that the set-outs have not risen as much. I don't have the current numbers on hand, but that's something that we can provide. But it's difficult to really interpret the tea leaves of eviction filing. So eviction filings have certainly gone up, and this year we're expecting about 25,000 evictions to be filed, so exceeding last year. So the necessity for representation is clear, but what representation is never going to be a silver bullet to the housing crisis or eviction filings. But what's clear is that by providing representation, it does reduce the likelihood of a eviction judgment being found in favor of the landlord, and therefore reducing the likelihood that a set out will occur. And for tenants who do have representation, they have a stronger likelihood of complying with their agreements if they do settle their case, simply because they have an advocate that is focusing on making sure that whatever agreement they put together is something that is actually feasible for what their circumstances are. I think there's a tendency for evictions to be fairly mechanical and automated, where a lot of folks are just going in, signing the first agreement that's sitting in front of them, and oftentimes because they're in a crisis, they're not necessarily thinking through what the implications are for signing those agreements, or not even understanding what the terms of their agreement are. So having an attorney there to make sure that they're taking everything step by step, understanding what the impact's going to be, what the consequences are for breaching that agreement, and the trajectory of what's going to happen if they sign that agreement. Those are all critical in making sure that tenants are both getting the rights that they deserve, but then also making sure that they have a better opportunity to maintaining or accessing housing.
And Deputy Director.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add to that is I think as a community, we have seen overall the impact of rental assistance in our community. That does play into the ability to find a better outcome than a set out. But at the same time, I think it also speaks to using and leveraging the ERA to create an infrastructure in our community so that countywide we have a partnership of organizations in the Central Ohio Stable Housing Network that are focused on aligning our priorities, working together when there's situations like Sandridge or Riverview, engaging and activating the homeless prevention network and our housing resource specialists so that if and when rental assistance is no longer available in our community at the same magnitude, we have created a network of providers who can work with residents and hopefully keep them to a point where they aren't even in eviction court, can work with the apartment association and others to help do the education and the information for our community as well. So I think it's an and.
Absolutely. No silver bullet here, but there are many things that work in collaboration with each other to reach the goal, which I think is to keep people safely housed. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
This data clearly demonstrates the profound benefits of investing in an Access to Counsel program, reinforcing our commitment to ensuring that eligible Columbus residents maintain this critical support. And so I'm proud to share that our office is actively conducting research and working to draft legislation for Access to Counsel as a codified right here in Columbus. With that, we have Ms. Naya Walters, our in-house counsel and legal analyst in our Legislative Research Office, who will share what we are looking at in pursuing this legislation.
Thank you, Council Member. Thank you, Council Members and community for joining us here tonight. So we have been exploring what is happening in Cleveland and Toledo and Cincinnati.
Closer.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? So we have been exploring what's been going on in Cleveland, Toledo, and Cincinnati. Cleveland is probably the longest running Access to Counsel program in the state of Ohio. And Toledo had their program begin in December of 2021. And then Cincinnati has an Access to Counsel pilot that they just put into place in December of 2023. So we have been reviewing that legislation to kind of understand what other cities are doing in our community. And so we are looking at a couple of different things. We're trying to, one, determine who is the customer that can be best served by this program. And so that's really dependent on the funding that we're able to ascertain for this program. As mentioned before, $1.5 million was set aside for the tenant assistance program. And so at that amount of funding, we could serve residents who are at 100% of the federal poverty line, as well as they have a minor child. In addition to that, we are hoping to continue to partner with Legal Aid, who has been a great partner in ensuring that residents have an opportunity to stay home in their homes, despite being potentially evicted from their homes. And so those are some of the things that we're really thinking about. In the coming weeks, we hope to have more to share and begin to think about what this could look like for our community. But we're definitely taking all of those things into account.
Thank you. And I would encourage our listening audience to please go and read the report. It's about 30 pages or so, but it is very informative and most importantly talks about that $24.4 million that we would see and quote savings as we think about everything that is connected to evictions and homelessness that could be addressed in other ways. And those are those social safety nets that we spoke about, healthcare, education, and things like that. And so it's a very illuminating report about where we currently stand in time in Columbus and in Franklin County, but what it would look like for us to pay now versus paying even more later. All right. And Ms. Nye, I think you are going to close us out because we're going to hear an update on the accessory dwelling unit pilot program that is being spearheaded by Councilmember Emmanuel Remy, who was unable to attend tonight's hearing. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Councilmember. We are desperately in need of more housing units here in Central Ohio. We are building a little bit under half of what we need to really think about the people that are going to be coming into our community. The rise in the cost of building materials and supply chain issues have made development of housing very expensive. In addition to that, Columbus is surrounded by other municipalities, so building out is less of an opportunity for us here, making density of the area that we do have a key element in housing our current residents and the over 1 million people that will come to call Central Ohio home in the future. The accessory dwelling unit pilot is one of the tools council is using to increase the supply of affordable housing in our community. We have set aside $1 million in capital funding to help us achieve this goal. This program will provide additional affordable housing units for low to moderate income individuals who make up to 120% of their area median income. This pilot subsidizes 30% up to $50,000 for the construction costs associated with the construction of an ADU. This program will focus on new builds and modular builds, so it will not currently cover any like demos or renovations over your garages and things of that nature. Pilot participants will also receive a manual that provides step-by-step instructions that will guide them through the process. In addition, there will be staff within the Department of Building and Zoning Services who will be prepared to answer questions and assist participants as they go on this journey to create additional units in our community. The city will be partnering with Homeport, who is a trusted community partner, to administer this program, and we hope to have this program fully operational at some point in 2025. Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you, Ms. Walters, and I apologize. I missed the few speakers that we had as it relates to access to council, so let me back up. The good thing is that our speaker is speaking on both the Stout study and the accessory dwelling unit pilot program. So Ms. Carly Boos, welcome back to council. Thank you.
Good evening again, Councilmember Favor, Council President Hardin, and members of council. My name is Carly. I am representing the Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio this evening. The legislative accomplishments that Housing for All has already achieved are certainly worthy of celebration. Ordinances prohibiting source of income discrimination and retaliation, supporting common sense consumer protections through pay to stay and rental receipt requirements, and expanding access to home ownership keep our city strong and our housing markets fair. Tonight, we do wish to address two additional proposals. First, we commend your consideration of the Access to Counsel initiative, which ensures that people navigating the justice system have sound legal advice needed to protect their homes and their families. Our housing laws are complex. Few people understand how and when to file a motion or submit evidence. These laws are evolving, with few people understanding or having the time to understand how they are shaped by legislative acts and judicial interpretation. And our laws are often, unfortunately, counterintuitive, with few appreciating the shifting burdens and procedural hurdles needed to enforce their rights. Although these intricacies ensure our laws are nimble and just, they also make legal representation indispensable. It is access to legal counsel to enforce our rights which give those rights meaning. Unfortunately, most tenants cannot afford an attorney, even when they risk the loss of housing, which can impair their health, their employment, their education, their child custody rights, their safety, and their credit. Without legal support, eviction hearings can be concluded in less than a minute, but with access to counsel, national research finds that 90% of these housing disputes can be resolved amicably. And in Franklin County, as you noted, an access to counsel program saves taxpayers $4 for every $1 invested. By keeping people out of homeless shelters, not only are we protecting our residents, but also our limited resources. I will note that the Alliance appreciates and agrees with Dimitri and the Apartment Association's recognition that a strong defense counsel is instrumental to a fair administration of justice. As former legal aid attorney myself, I also appreciated the comment that legal aid is doing a great job. As we do prepare for a future without the Federal Emergency Rent Assistance Program, which expires in 2025, we ask you to continue consideration of how we can scale and localize that successful program. Secondly, AHACO is eager to see the accessory dwelling unit pilot take form. Columbus has a rich architectural history with a long tradition of carriage houses and above garage units and in-law suites. Unfortunately, that culture of design excellence has been lost in too many ways in favor of lowest common denominator zoning. Prohibiting reasonable ADUs deprives people of dominion in their own home, preventing them from meeting accessibility needs, accommodating families, or supplementing their income. We believe that allowing greater diversity in our housing stock is a critical conversation for the next phase of Zone In, and one which can be piloted through this ADU program. Studying the functionality and feasibility of ADUs now, particularly how they can be used to create wealth and expand affordability, will inform our broader modernization of regulations later. I've also been deputized by the Convergence Columbus administration to speak on their behalf tonight. It's 120 local organizations that are working to close the Black and minority home ownership gaps, and they have identified ADUs and the availability thereof as a priority for their work. I want to thank you for your time and for your work to continue supporting the people of Columbus, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
And you did both in 3 minutes. Thank you. Rounds of applause. Are there any questions or comments for Ms. Booz? Thank you, but we truly do appreciate your partnership and continued advocacy. All right, and Mr. Dimitri, you're back up.
Thank you once again, members of council, Council Member Favor, President Hardin, for giving me the opportunity to speak on this legislation. I was a part of this study, so I know a little bit more about this one than the last time I was up here, so at least I can speak with some more background. First and foremost, let me just say that I'm quoted in this study as saying that it takes about $500 difference for an average tenant that faces eviction to avoid eviction. The reason I said that in this study is because at the time a tenant doesn't pay their rent, they're usually only one paycheck off from being able to cover it. And so the most important time from the industry standard to prevent eviction is at the time that the rent is due. Once we get into eviction court, our costs increase. Typically, eviction court ends up about 45 days after the day that they're not able to pay their first month rent. And so at that 45-day period, you've got 1 month's rent due, which is, let's say, $1,000. You have another half month's rent due, $500. The cost of the eviction, the late fees, other fees that are tacked on by landlords. So your cost of doing business is so much exponentially higher at the time that eviction occurs. And I don't have a problem with what legal aid provides. I just don't think that necessarily that's where the best money is spent for costs to stay lower for landlords and tenants. I acknowledge that there probably is a huge impact to city services for avoiding evictions. But the city, Department of Development, and I partnered on a project during the end of COVID to try to take 250 tenants and pay their rent for them before an eviction was filed. And the reason I thought that that program was so very important, and I encourage you to try to figure out a way to bring it back or to try to do more rental assistance, is because if we can take $500 a tenant, and we can give a tenant $500 at the time that they're not able to pay their rent, before they're in default, before they have any possibility of being in eviction court, we might be able to solve that problem with $500 instead of taking $2,500 of rental assistance plus $1,224 of legal advice, or $4,000, to try to solve that problem, which is what this study is contemplating. So it's not a bad study, it's not a bad idea. The deputy director said it's an and. I don't disagree necessarily, but here are some thoughts of mine on behalf of the industry. First of all, we have 4.5 evictions per 100,000 renters in the city of Columbus. And despite the fact that the filings have increased, that number has not. The statistics remain the same. One reason, I don't think it's reading tea leaves like my colleague Mr. Tsushima. I don't think that evictions are ambiguous. More evictions are filed because there's more buildings being built. There are more people renting, so there are more evictions. Our county is different than Cincinnati and Cleveland because we only have one court. So the statistic of filings looks really big, but the rate of evictions stays the same. We're not the highest rate of evictions in the state of Ohio. Akron, Toledo surpass us. So at the end of the day, we're evicting about the same rate of people that we always have, even though we have more evictions. In addition to that, Impact and other aid organizations are not funding rental assistance until the day of court right now. So landlords actually have an incentive to file an eviction so that they get paid. That's another reason evictions are increasing. So on behalf of the industry, while this may be a good idea, any money that you can divert from this program downstream and bring upstream to where rental assistance is getting to people before they're really in default and before they're facing eviction is money better spent.
Thank you for your comments.
Any questions?
Thank you for your comments
Appreciate
and
it.
testimony. Just want to make sure we called out Dr. Londale Towns again and Miss Anna Maria Perales-Lang. And last but certainly not least, Lori Crabtree. I was going to make a bad Price is Right joke.
I really felt that.
Yeah.
I felt that Price is Right energy. Hi, thanks y'all for letting me speak. ADUs. In my work as a real estate agent and also as a neighbor, I get asked a lot about ADUs. And in the past, I would say 2 years, it's really been coming up more and more and more. Not sure if it's a zeitgeist in the media or if just more people have somehow become aware of them. but there is a real demand for them. And what I see the most is the sandwich generation getting pushed by having young kids at home and having aging parents that also need care, and feeling the pinch of really out of control home health care costs for those aging parents while they're still paying daycare for their children. Like, it's a real financial burden. And I think that people could capitalize on the equity that they have in their homes, which a lot of them do, and put in an ADU and go a very long way to solving some of that problem, even maybe some of the childcare problems, because if you've got your grandparents on site, maybe they can't fully take care of themselves, but hey, they can watch your kid for 4 hours. So I just see a real demand for it. I think that it would really benefit a lot of the first-time home buyers coming into the market as well, if they could see an investment road for themselves to maybe be able to put an ADU in the backyard and have a friend come and rent that from them, and then they're sharing the costs. Again, it adds more housing so that you have more doors and more humans, and I think that's always going to be a good thing if we can get a little more density into our urban neighborhoods. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Crabtree. Are there any questions or comments? And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's the recognition that in these interesting economic times, that we're seeing a lot of multi-generational living. And single-family homes, and how we can be responsive and supportive of that. It's also navigating, every Monday night we have to have zoning at 6:30 p.m., and we might be on one piece of zoning that might have to do with a carriage house or ADU, or a little tiny home, and that conversation could last an hour to an hour and a half. It is this council's ability to navigate that. Not everybody wants a single family home anymore.
Right.
People want something that's a little bit more flexible and meets their needs for where they're at in their life right now. So thank you for acknowledging that.
But quickly, it's an interesting thing because I worked in commercial appraisal in another state. And so I investigated zoning a lot in small towns, in particular in upstate New York and in northern Pennsylvania. And in those little towns, R1 was a 1 to 4 family almost across the board. And I don't know if it was a convenience thing, but I definitely think looking at the housing that was available in those places I rented when I was in my 20s and lived in those places, there were a lot of doubles and triples in those neighborhoods. The urban core was nothing but doubles and triples. We don't have that kind of housing here. We don't have that kind of opportunity for folks to live multi-generationally on the same plot of land. And I think ADUs would go a long way to helping us jumpstart that process.
Thank you for your testimony this evening. Yes, Council President Harden.
Yeah, I just wanted to tie the two conversations that we just had around ADUs and right to counsel, like at work. I think that the beauty of what I was a part of in this hearing tonight is that I think I heard you even say there's no silver bullet here. But we, on one hand, know that we have a supply and demand issue in terms of available units, available housing for folks. And we should be addressing that. And we're talking about that. But on the other hand, we know that we have today people in our community that are feeling the squeeze and the pinch in a new way. Again, as a Columbus kid, some of this is really new for our city. And that we're not looking at one or the other, that we have to tackle this with all of the above. I would venture to say that over the next 10 years, this is going to be our biggest issue in Central Ohio. The number one issue in Central Ohio will be housing affordability, and housing access. And so this work of this committee will be louder, I believe, because of your leadership. It has definitely given us new language for how to talk about it as a city. But, as I think about the work that Council President Pro Tem Dorans led with zoning, 1.1 or 1.0, there will be a zoning 2.0.
Yeah.
And these are the type of things that we're going to have to think about both on the other side. So just wanted to say thank you again. This is a full-rounded conversation that will continue.
Absolutely. Thank you, Council President. Are any closing remarks by my colleagues? Well, let me just say thank you all for being here this evening, to Councilmember Bankston, Barossa de Padilla, de Alcauer, President Pro Tem Dorans, Councilmember Green, Councilmember Weish. I might have set a record here tonight. Yeah. Thank you all for being here, as well as Ms. Naya Walters, Deputy Directors Hannah Jones and Tony Celebrezzi for joining us here today and providing those updates. I also want to extend my gratitude to all of our invited speakers, as well as our residents that provided testimony. And once again, please take me up on my offer so that we can have continued conversation about the policies that we have discussed tonight and others for the future. And as I've emphasized before, addressing the housing crisis requires more than a single policy solution. We must continue to be intentional in revising zoning laws, preserving current affordable housing, and finding innovative ways to increase housing stock in our city. It's also critical to recognize the impact of systemic racism, the network of policies, procedures, laws, and institutions that have perpetrated disparities in housing. A holistic, comprehensive approach is essential to understanding and meeting the needs of our communities. So I encourage everyone to please remain engaged with council offices. Don't give up on us, because we're still working, and the departments to share ideas and stay informed on these initiatives. For more information, please visit housingforallcbus.com, where updates on various programs are available, and rental614.com, the rental assistance hub for tenants and landlords. If you have any questions about the legislation, please contact my legislative aide, Sandeep Jindal, at snjindal@columbus.gov. A final big thank you to my team, our City Hall technology and streaming team, including Mark Carter and CTV. This concludes our hearing. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.